All right. So the question is, how are all of you data heroes measuring the business value and ROI for data and analytics initiatives? And what are the challenges you have in tracking your efforts? These are big questions, and a lot of people struggle with these questions. So in this next session titled Measuring the Business Value and ROI of Data and Analytics, we'll hear from a panel of data heroes who have fought the tough battles and have been through the journey of measuring the business value and ROI of data and analytics. So please help me welcome Ibrahim Itani, Head of Analytics and Innovation at Marathon Petroleum Corporation, Andy Gingrich, SVP Financial Systems at BOK Financial, and then, of course, Malcolm Hawker, Head of Data Strategy here at Prophecy, and Malcolm is going to be moderating this panel. So without further ado, take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Reed. And thanks to everybody for tuning in, for joining us today on our inaugural Data Hero Summit. It's my honor to be here live this Thursday afternoon with Ibrahim and Andy. Thanks, guys. So good to see you. We're here to talk about ROI. I can tell you it was the number one topic of discussion that I had while as a Gartner analyst. So I'm certain our audience will get some benefit from today. Let's start with, MDM is all about foundation. We like foundations here. Let's start with the foundation. Simple question. Why? Why do we need to be talking about ROI? Why do we as data practitioners need to be building business cases, understanding the ROI of our investments? It seems like a simple question, but I think it's worthy of actually peeling the onion a little bit. Andy, to you, what do you think of when you think of the why around ROI?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me, Malcolm. When I think about the why in this particular topic, I liken it to any strategy in your organization and culture. You need to establish the why for your company. And different people may have different answers. So a few reasons you may want to start understanding the business value of your data and analytics. It can help you identify the priority of your work. So let's say you're further down the path of understanding this unit of work can get us $10,000 in revenue, and this unit of work can get us $500,000 in revenue. That's a pretty easy prioritization. Another one is oftentimes it can help you justify more resources or more investment in technology, or maybe it's skill sets that you need training for. If you can understand that the thing you want to do can generate more revenue, reduce expenses, create efficiencies, maybe really tamp down on some organizational risks, you may be able to get some more staff on your team. And then lastly, a really important one, Malcolm, is kind of the flywheel concept. If you start establishing value and you can prove that value, you can help build some credibility with the executives and senior leaders. And maybe you start getting invited to some of those conversations earlier in terms of their business strategies.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andy. There's a lot to chew on there. Ibrahim, what would you add? Oh, Ibrahim, you're muted. Gets us all.
What about now?
Sounded good. Sounded good.
All right. First of all, glad to be here with this panel. And Malcolm, I appreciate any second I get to work with you. Just reminds me of the old Gartner days.
Indeed.
So good old days.
Indeed.
So I think Andy nailed it on the head, right? But there are also a lot of things that we need to consider going into the future. The way we measure our progress today is different from where we used to be in the yesteryears, because the focus before was more on the ROI as compared to how to get to that specific ROI. And this is where data really comes into play. And this is something that we need to think about when we are getting started in putting our programs together, is how can we make tracking of ROI intrinsic to the progress of the project itself, because the other side of the coin is we measure it when we are done. So if you do it way up front, it allows you to have a better way to see whether the project that you are working on is going to realize the value or not. So you can think of those as leading indicators, as just lagging indicators when it comes into happen at the end.
Yeah, awesome. And I would add, stakeholder engagement and buy-in, right? Like I used to hear this all the time when I was a Gartner analyst, which is data and analytics leaders are trying to do something, whatever it is, right? MDM, catalog,
Yeah.
buy-in Tableau, doesn't matter. And they need buy-in from end users, from stakeholders. That's a key thing. I'm looking at the chat as well. I think something I don't pay as much attention to, and maybe we probably should. Ramesh, great comment here about motivating the team. And being able to, if you're tracking, as you said, Ibrahim, and you're tracking it all the way through, and you've got these benchmarks, and hey, announce it, right? Scream it from the mountaintops. Look at what we're doing for the business. So, Ramesh, great add onto the conversation. So, it seems to me like this is the reason why we exist as CDOs, as data and analytics leaders, is to deliver the value, deliver the ROI. But we also know, based on survey after survey, this is a tough one for data leaders. So Andy, what have you seen as some of the key roadblocks, at least during your career, as to the whys we're not doing this?
Sure. When I thought about this one, I thought, I don't know about you, but most organizations are running pretty lean these days. And that could be for a variety of reasons: internal pressures, external pressures, etc. So it could be challenging to introduce yet another process for your team to follow, or yet another report for someone to look at. So back to our first question, if you can establish a strong why, it can really help with that. And to Ibrahim's point, this isn't something you just do on the back end. It's not like after 3 months of work, you're like, all right, what value did that bring? We found that if we, from the very first question, when someone requests something of us, hey, I'd like you to build a new data mart. Great. What does that do for you, right? And you start that conversation around what value it can bring. And if they struggle with articulating that, it's incumbent upon us to help them walk through that. And maybe just in your culture, you haven't been expected to do that, to build smaller business cases for these things. So oftentimes we build these big business cases for 12-month transformations instead of, why not build one for that 1-month project? Like what's wrong with that, right? So a lot of times it's cultural. A lot of times it's just not really taking the time to do that from front to back. That'd be my reaction to that.
What have you seen in terms of roadblocks around this, Ibrahim, during your career?
Quite honestly, there are many of them, but all of them can be overcome if people work together. So there's really there is a road to possibility if you think about it, and if you make it part of the cultural thinking of, hey, we are becoming data driven, and this is how we are going to do it in the organization. So, but one of the major, I would say, roadblocks is that organizations that has not matured into a data-driven organization still consider this to be an IT function, as a technical function, as compared to it takes really a village to pull it in together. So when you move the discussion more for it to become a technical function, then we are starting to measure things that probably do not matter to the overall project, program, or objective. So people then do not kind of tend to go and work on a system that allows them to track things end to end, because they will assume we are going to do it as part of the project management, which is not how we should do and track metrics, right? So the concentration also will move from the value of the data itself into the collection of the data. And there is a big difference between the two. Anybody can collect data, but not many people can bring in the business semantic of it. The second is that, people sometimes are in a way impatient, or they have the kind of the instant gratification of expectations in their head. They want to see things like happening immediately. So the persistence to see ROI at each and every step sometimes might derail the overall objective, right? Yeah. So remember that, these projects, sometimes the benefit of data and analytics materialize over a longer term, but you can always cherry pick and show progress. And this is something that we should do as well. And probably the last, and I'll conclude with this, since I came from Gartner, it's always the rule of 3. It has to be 3. So lastly, it is really kind of the skill gap. People need to invest in their partners, if they don't have their skill gaps in bringing in the tools, if you cannot build it in-house, and I do not encourage people to build things in-house, find yourself a good partner and bring them to the table so that they can help you analyze and figure out what is the true ROI that will be coming from these projects, right? So the expertise and the translation of the work is definitely needed from people who have done it before. And there are others that will kind of stop at these three.
That last point is really interesting to me. I'd love to press on that a little bit from the perspective of kind of the skills and roles. We had a comment in the chat from Nusrath, which raised an interesting point about, does your company kind of value data as an asset? And I can tell you that most do not. And I think that is arguably another roadblock here. Nusrath and others, if you haven't consumed a book called Infonomics by the learned Doug Laney around this topic, I would certainly recommend that. Yeah. But Andy, you work in a finance function now. I don't know whether your company does or doesn't value data as an asset, but how would you respond to that and say, okay, well, I've got this roadback. My CFO doesn't see data as an asset, so maybe I shouldn't bother.
Yeah, number one, yes, we do. We have come to recognize data as an asset. And where I would start with this, it's something that Ibrahim kind of hinted at is, you may be kind of overwhelmed, like, well, how do I determine ROI? Well, the scope of the valuation can sometimes get out of hand, especially if you're starting, right? Because with any ROI, there's going to be the benefits and there's going to be the expenses. And so, if you just pick one around revenue or maybe expense savings and maybe not focus too much on the underlying cost to get that done, at least you're showing that initial value. And you can get some win to say, hey, I just put a little bit of effort into this and I was able to at least determine we got $10,000 more revenue with this month-long data science project that leveraged, a mastered set of data. I can't imagine many executives wouldn't appreciate that type of measurement and ask you, how you could do that again. And as you refine, just like anything, and get better at it, then maybe you can start adding in those other variables, like the hourly cost of the employees to get it done, the amount of cloud costs associated. Maybe there's additional cloud costs associated with processing your new solution. And so those types of things can get executives' attentions. We all know they kind of have short attention spans because of their role. And so if you can find those quick wins, in my opinion, instead of focusing on some monolithic 12 to 18-month project, you'll certainly get some support from them.
Yeah, and you and Ibrahim both touched on this balance, right?
Yeah.
Between sometimes we are talking about a 3-year ROI here from a large scale, maybe it's an ERP transformation or something like that. We are, but how do you find the balance between both the short and the long term? Because the business is impatient and wants returns now. That's something that you certainly touched on, Andy. And basically what you said, I'm paraphrasing you, is that even though you may not have data on your balance sheet, ROI is still how we make priority discussions. It's still decisions. It's still how we allocate resources within an organization. So even if it's not, it's still something you need to do.
Yep.
Ibrahim, let's circle back to you. You had touched on the issue of a skills issue and a skills gap, and that's certainly something that I'd seen often at Gartner. I would talk to IT leaders who knew how to deploy CRM systems, or they knew how to deploy BI systems, but when it came to some of the stuff around the how, it was really, really challenging. I had a lot of conversations this way. So what would you advise from the actual how? Let's get it done. Let's overcome some of these gaps and get it done. What would you recommend?
I mean, remember that, each organization has a different culture, and culture plays a big role into promoting data and analytics programs, right? So for example, the discussion is data an asset? Is it not? Is it on the balance sheet? Is it not? I cannot think of any organization today that is not data driven, whether they know it or not. So this is kind of my intro to this. But if you start looking at the hows, right, we need to make sure that the team are establishing very good linkage between any data and analytics initiative and the objectives, the business objectives that it will try to deliver. Remember, data and analytics is usually one player of many, or several. that will lead into that ROI. So having a very good standard, I think number two, sure that you are leveraging standards. Can you still hear me? Because I think
you're coming and going. You're coming and going a little bit, Ibrahim. But yeah, please continue.
Okay, I think is it back now?
It seems okay.
Okay, so number one was establishing the clear linkage. Number two is make sure that we have standard metrics, right? And the last one is probably calibration. This is definitely part of the how. You need from time to time go and calibrate. And this is really based on the transparency of having the metrics available for everybody to check, right? So now if you think about it from top to down, we have established connectivity between the programs that we want to run and the initiative, the data and analytics initiative and others, making sure that we are not going fancy in tracking metrics that are very vague to understand and having a key result measure that leads into that. And then making sure that we are going back and recalibrating to make sure that, we are still on track and we are on the right quantification of the problem and leading to the ROI.
Something you touched on, so important. This is not a one and done. So if you do some sort of ROI analysis as a part of a business case, it's not just filed and left away. This is something that is managed. This business case becomes a living and breathing document. To your point, Ibrahim, you need to manage. Just want to touch on the chat really quickly. Thank you, Keith. Yes, it's Douglas Laney is the author of Infonomics. Ed, couldn't agree more. You got to break things into small chunks. And Melanie, yes, business alignment is absolutely positively critical here. Thanks for the great comments and chats, guys. Yeah. In our last couple of minutes, I'd turn back to you, Andy, in terms of like the how. Ibrahim just touched on KPIs. I know that you've had some experience here on doing this around KPIs that work and don't work. How would you respond? Oh, you're on mute. No worries.
It's funny when I say sorry, even though I'm still muted. KPIs are it's a great it can be a great tool to use, but sometimes it can also be overused. And also you got to be careful when KPIs can drive unintended behavior. So I totally agree that you've got to revisit those KPIs regularly to make sure, is anybody looking at this? Number one. Number two, am I measuring something that we can actually take action on? I'll touch on the how a little bit. I mentioned earlier about an overall demand management process. If someone comes to you and requests work, you can set up a very simplistic template to say, will this generate new revenue? Will this reduce expenses? Will this create efficiencies in terms of, working on higher value tasks? When we got to the point where we asked that enough, people knew that they needed to become prepared with those answers before they even called us. Right. So we found that as just a nice cultural win to go, okay, they now understand what we expect of them, which really kind of helps, again, get that flywheel moving a little faster. So there's a lot of ways to start it. Just like anything, you got to take the first step or it'll never happen. So
this is fantastic. We're down to our final few seconds. So we do need to wrap. This was supposed to be a lightning round. I think it was lightning-like. I mean, just pretty quick. I love the flywheel metaphor, right? And because it aligns well to kind of an agile MVP type approach, right? Keeping things really small, deliver value, and do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. For more details, I would invite everybody to connect with me on LinkedIn. Literally, this is topic number 1 for me on LinkedIn that I'm talking about day in and day out. So we dive deeper into that in offline channels. Thanks to everybody. Ibrahim, thank you so much for attending and participating and offering your insights. Same to you, Andy. Thanks to everybody for attending, and stay tuned for our next panel discussion hosted by my friend Martin Boyd very soon. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.